All right, so millionaire coal baron Joe Manchin is continuing to dance circles around Joe Biden, completely eviscerating any potential chance of meaningful legislation getting passed before the 2022 midterms, where Democrats are still on track to get absolutely slaughtered by Republicans. And I got a good breakdown here from Jeff Stein, which is giving us some of the latest in terms of the completely elusive nature of what exactly Joe Manchin is willing to get passed, if anything at all. So here from the Washington Post, they say fears mount inside the White House that Manchin won't agree to any deal. Now, this is a dynamic that I've been talking about on this channel basically since we got word that Joe Manchin had an issue with the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan and then the $1.75 trillion Build Back Better plan. It was very clear that he is not engaging in any good faith negotiations. He wasn't even willing to come out and say specifically which policies he would be in favor of passing, and all the while he is essentially stonewalling Joe Biden and continuing to delay and delay while Joe Biden continues to refuse to use his main weapon in this entire fight, the bully pulpit, and actually pressure Joe Manchin to fall in line on some of the most popular policies, not just within the country, but also within his home state of West Virginia. So let's go ahead and watch this video first, and then we'll get into some of the more recent updates.
Infrastructure. If you want to spend $2 or $3 trillion, invest it in infrastructure. Most important thing, do an big infrastructure. Spend $2, $3, $4 trillion over a 10-year period on infrastructure. You want to put everybody back to work? There's a lot of people that lost their jobs, that those jobs aren't coming back. They need a place to work to make a living. Every state can start an infrastructure program. I do not want to add more debt on. So if that's $1 trillion or $1.5 or $2 trillion, whatever that comes out to be over a 10-year period, that's what I would be voting for. So if you throw another $2, $3, $4 trillion, you know, we might have a hard time with a tax code, the adjustments that I believe need to be made.
4 to 6 trillion. You're not going with that.
I don't think I could ever get there to that.
It's clocked in at about $3.5 trillion. Yeah. You've expressed some concerns about that cost. Is it the cost or is it paying for it that you...
Well, they're saying it's all paid for. Now, if it's all paid for, you look at it in a different light. Okay, there's a lot of great things in there.
Are you a hard no?
On the 3.5? Yes.
Okay. Is there a number you can support?
I haven't looked at that because you know why? They won't look at it responsibly and reasonably for a tax code.
Do you have a ceiling?
My ceiling is this, the need of the American people. I've never been a liberal in any way, shape, or the form. I'm not asking them to change. I'm willing to come from 0 to 1.5.
What, 1.7 too big for you? 1.75 too high for you?
No, that was negotiated. As more of the real details outlined, the basic framework are released, what I see are shell games, budget gimmicks that make the real cost of the so-called $1.75 trillion bill estimated to be almost twice that amount. I cannot vote to continue with this piece of legislation. I just can't. I've tried everything humanly possible. I can't get there.
You're done. This is a no.
This is a no.
Okay, so I mean,
Democrats...
very clearly you can see from the shifting dynamics of exactly what he was coming out and publicly saying about exactly what he was willing to get passed, he completely changed his mind about a billion fucking times, right? He started out by saying, oh, we should do a big, bold investment to create American jobs, right? And do a $1, $2, $3, $4 trillion infrastructure package. Then he completely walked that back and said, no, I'm not in favor of a $4 trillion spending package. I'm only in favor of something that's significantly less than that. Then he said, okay, maybe I'll be in favor of something like a $1.75 trillion Build Back Better plan, which he himself essentially got out a pen and wrote and limited. And then after that, he came out again and was like, no, that's not even good enough. And essentially all of the reasons why he was giving for not supporting that legislation were entirely bullshit. I mean, if you're going to talk about the debt and the deficit, I mean, number one, the reasons why we have inflation right now are not because of the debt and the deficit. The reasons why we have inflation right now are largely due to supply chain issues, which, believe it or not, could have been helped with a much bigger and bolder infrastructure investment plan that would have expanded, for example, our ports and created a much more reliable and sustainable supply chain here in the United States. So if you wanted to address the issues that he was pointing out there of inflation, for example, then making an investment in infrastructure, making investments in expansions of social welfare programs that are not only extremely popular, but also economically beneficial, those would be things that would help to reduce the impact of inflation on average working class families. So everything that he's saying there about, oh, I'm just acting in the best interest of my constituents, I'm just acting in the best interest of the American people. No, you're not. You are blocking legislation that is desperately needed by the American people, and also, just as a reminder here, overwhelmingly supported by your West Virginia constituents. You are blocking this legislation on behalf of corporate America. You're blocking this legislation on behalf of the corporations and billionaires that funnel infinite sums of money into your campaign coffers, and you're also looking after your own personal financial interests. I mean, is there really any doubt that Joe Manchin is opposing legitimate climate legislation while he simultaneously is making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year off of his dirty coal company in West Virginia? I mean, no, it's just rampant corruption, and it's very obvious from the beginning, or was obvious from the beginning, that this guy was acting on behalf of corporate America. He wasn't acting in good faith. So they never should have wasted any time doing these backroom negotiations behind the scenes. They should have, from the beginning, used the leverage that they have in bullying Joe Manchin publicly and use that as leverage to force him to fall in line on policies that, again, are supported by the overwhelming majority of his constituents. So you can't even turn around and just say, oh, he's, from a state that overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Well, his constituents that overwhelmingly voted for Trump, believe it or not, support policies that would materially improve their conditions. So all of the different talking points that he was trotting out there were complete dishonest bullshit. But they give us a little bit more details on the latest, and really this is just a perfect example of how pathetic Joe Biden's style of governance really is. But they say President Joe Biden last spring proposed spending more than $4 trillion to transform the American economy. In negotiations last fall, after some of that money ended up in the bipartisan infrastructure law, the administration lowered its request to roughly $2 trillion. Now, with time running out before November's elections, many White House officials say privately that they'd consider themselves fortunate to secure a deal even worth $1 trillion. Now, keep in mind, $1 trillion over 10 years. Okay, so $100 billion a year is what they're hoping they would be fortunate to get out of Joe Manchin under their current strategy right now. $100 billion a year, what, 1/8 of what we are spending on our military budget? That's how little you care about working class Americans. I mean, it's just spitting in the face of average Americans around the country. But they continue saying Biden's shrinking ambitions are largely the result of failed negotiations with Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia, the ever elusive 50th vote for the president's agenda in an evenly divided chamber. And White House officials are confronting the real fear that they will fail to reach any deal with Manchin, even one that leaves out most of what Biden had initially hoped to accomplish, according to 3 senior administration officials and 3 outside advisors in communication with the White House, who all spoke on the condition of anonymity. And they say a year after Biden introduced his climate and social spending plans, the White House is running out of time to get Manchin on board, with many lawmakers in Congress viewing July 4th as a crucial deadline for action. So doesn't look like in the next couple of months that they're going to be able to get anything meaningful passed, at least if Joe Biden is not willing to come and publicly put the pressure on Joe Manchin. But they say in recent weeks, White House officials have quietly tried gauging Manchin's interest in a package that would consist primarily of clean energy initiatives. I wonder if he's going to be in favor of that. Prescription drug reform and higher taxes on the rich and corporations, the people said. And keep in mind, these higher taxes that they're referencing here would not even bring us back to the tax rates under the Obama administration. So essentially, their ideal world goal is half undoing the 2017 Trump tax cuts that way disproportionately, like 80% or more of the benefits, went to the top 1% and top 0.1% of the American people. So again, these aren't even like big, bold tax reforms. This is just half undoing what Trump did. And even that seems to be, out of reach for the Biden administration. But they say the ideas discussed internally include more than $500 billion in deficit reduction, the people said. And on Monday, a Manchin spokeswoman reiterated that he supports measures to boost U.S. energy production. Primarily, I'm sure he wants that to be in fossil fuels, lower prescription drug costs, and raise tax revenue from corporations and the rich. Now, another key part of this is White House officials have quietly tried gauging Manchin's interest. That is the entire problem with Biden's strategy throughout this entire process of trying to get his agenda passed. You can't do quiet backroom negotiations with somebody who is not acting in good faith. You have to go out there. You have to go to West Virginia, do rallies, bring up West Virginia coal miners, bring up average working class West Virginia families, and have them get up there and explain that Joe Manchin is starving them. I mean, that's what you would actually have to do. Do press conferences every day, call him out by name, point out the corrupting influences that are funneling money into his campaigns, point out his personal financial ties to the fossil fuel industry. There are so many different things that you could do to actually apply pressure on Joe Manchin instead of just doing these bullshit bad faith negotiations behind the scenes where he clearly is not interested in getting literally anything done. I mean, we spent, what, a year on this now? We spent months and months and months on this process trying and begging Joe Manchin to do anything, and he's clearly not having it. So maybe, I don't know, adjust your strategy in any way, shape, or form, but it doesn't look like they're going to be doing that. They say, despite his support for these provisions generally, Manchin has not yet made clear to the White House precisely what he would support in a final agreement, the people familiar with the administration's discussions said. And Manchin privately told lawmakers in recent days that he wants Congress to approve a bipartisan energy deal in response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which could complicate an already difficult timeline for a broader spending proposal, according to two other people familiar with the matter, who also spoke on the condition of anonymity. And they say a bipartisan group, including Manchin, met on Monday night to discuss the energy legislation. And they say one White House advisor added, there's real fear inside the building that Manchin's stonewalling will run out the clock on Biden's legislative agenda throughout the rest of the year, leading the administration and congressional Democrats into November without anything else to offer voters. Well, first off, yes, you could be offering voters many other things that Biden could do with executive orders, like, student debt cancellation, for example. There are plenty of different things Joe Biden could be doing unilaterally with the power that he has as the president to win over voters for November. But if you actually wanted to get something legislatively done, then again, change your fucking strategy from these backroom negotiations where Manchin is not acting in good faith. But they say Sam Runyon, a Manchin spokesperson, said in an email that the senator is always willing to engage in discussions about the best way to move our country further. And Manchin told Bloomberg News on Monday night that lawmakers reach out to him casually, but that there is nothing formal on a new proposal. So it looks like they're not even really fucking trying. And on Tuesday, as he left a half-hour meeting with Senator Chuck Schumer, Manchin declared that any Democratic economic legislation moving on Capitol Hill this year would have to be closely focused on combating inflation. Now, again, this is a completely bullshit narrative that he's trying to push here, because the problem with inflation has been driven by two main factors: supply chain issues, as I was talking about earlier, and also corporate greed. Now, the way that you would crack down on those things is with bigger, bolder legislation than even the $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan that you rejected. If average American families are feeling inflationary pressures at the grocery store or at the gas pump, don't you think that it would ease those inflation pressures on those people if you were, I don't know, to allow Medicare to negotiate drug prices, if you were to give them assists with childcare and other costs, etc. All of the different investments, you can go down the line, investing in long-term care, expanding Medicare coverage, childcare investments, extending tax cuts for family, paid family and medical leave, universal pre-K, extending ACA subsidies, clean energy investments. Every single one of those policies that Manchin rejected would help the American people deal with inflationary pressures that are largely not being caused by overspending within the government. Okay, so it's just a completely bullshit narrative that he's putting forward here. But they say he remains seriously concerned about the financial status of our country and believes fighting inflation by restoring fairness to our tax system and paying down our national debt must be our first priority, Runyon said in a statement. She added that Manchin believes in fighting climate change, yeah, I'm sure that he does, and promoting U.S. energy independence while ensuring no family has to choose between life-saving medications and putting food on the table. This coming from the same guy who literally openly said that parents were going to be using the child tax credits that he blocked from getting extended and thereby plunged millions of children back into poverty. He literally said we shouldn't extend the child tax credits because parents are using them on drugs. Okay, he literally said that as all of the evidence was indicating that they were using it on shit like medications and putting food on the table for their families and childcare. So it's just, again, the most ghoulish shit that you could possibly imagine. But of course, they say leaving the meeting with Schumer on Tuesday, Manchin ruled out discussions of social programs and tempered expectations of a potential deal. There's nothing formal, he told reporters. I want to make sure y'all understand there's no false hopes here. So here is Joe Manchin once again completely dancing on the legislative graveyard of Joe Biden's entire agenda. And Joe Biden seems to be completely set with just sitting back and allowing him to do this as Democrats are set to get completely clobbered in the 2022 midterm elections. So, if you're not willing to go out there, if you're not willing to use the bully pulpit, if you're not willing to even call him out by name in public, then how do you expect he's going to move on any of these issues? He clearly has absolutely no urgency. He clearly has absolutely no interest in opposing corporate America and opposing his own personal financial interests. So it's really just a perfect example of how pathetic pathetic the Joe Biden administration is being right now. And, you know, nothing is going to get done before 2022 if this track stays as it is right now. And Democrats are just going to get absolutely clobbered. And then the second 2 years of Biden's administration are going to somehow be even less productive than this already incredibly unproductive first 2 years have been.